So in today's video, we're going to discuss God telling a man to sacrifice his son as a burnt offering. So let's get into it. So before we get into today's video, let me know in the comment section below what you think right now as it stands before we get into today's video about God telling a man to sacrifice his son. So in today's video, we're going to be answering the question and discussing why did God tell Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, okay, as an offering. Now, it's really interesting because in the Bible, there's pretty much two examples of this. This is one of them and there's another one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to literally tell you about the other one in a few minutes, just so you can know exactly where that is in the Bible. And you can actually compare both scenarios so you can see both of them next to each other. But before we do that, we need to focus on this question at hand, okay? And generally, what people do is they read in the scriptures this event in Genesis 22, okay? Where this event happens. Now, one thing I want to say to you is most of the time, if not all the time, probably at least 80% of the time, when you have a question about the Bible, okay, or someone saying something about the scriptures, context is normally going to be the thing that's going to get you where you need to go, okay? And what I mean by that is, yes, God did tell Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac in Genesis 22. And we're going to go through that shortly, okay? And remember, I said I'm going to give you the scripture reference to the other place in the Bible where we see something similar to this, okay? But before we get into that specific example, what I want to say to you is we're going to go through Genesis 22 and I'm going to basically walk you through what actually happens, okay? So verse 2, what does it say? It says, "And he said, Take now thy son, thine only Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." Okay? Now there's a couple of very impactful things that happen in verse 2. Okay? The first thing I want to highlight is that Isaac is called his only son. Okay? Now, we already know, if you just read a couple chapters previously in Genesis, he had another son. And the first thing God is highlighting here, okay, remember what I said, just keep Jesus on your mind, okay? So what Jesus did was, he claimed to be the Son of God, basically, okay, which would classify himself as the only son, so to speak. That's the first thing you can get from verse 2, okay? So God classifies Isaac as Abraham's only son. What else does he say? He says, whom thou lovest, okay? One thing I want to say to you about this is the first place in the Bible that love occurs in the scripture, okay? Not with, let's say, for example, God and Adam. It's not to say God didn't love Adam, not to say with Adam and Eve, not to say he didn't love her. Of course they did. But this is the first place in the scripture that the word love is mentioned, okay? And why is that significant, okay? Because the first time we see the words love in the Bible is a father about to offer his son as a sacrifice. What does this remind you of, okay? For God so loved the world that okay, John 3:16, okay? Keep this Jesus thing going on. What else does he say? He says, go to the land of Moriah, okay? Where was Moriah? If you do a study of the word Moriah, M-O-R-I-A-H, in the scriptures, there's going to be one more occurrence of this later on. I believe it's in Kings or Chronicles, somewhere there. And it talks about how Solomon was building God's house, basically, in Jerusalem. So Moriah was in Jerusalem. Okay? Why is this significant? Because God is telling Abraham, go to the land of Moriah, okay, and offer up your son, okay? Where would Jesus go to be offered? Okay? basically in this region. Remember this as well. What? Make an offering. Okay. What did Jesus become? A sacrifice. Okay. When he was crucified. So even just the first verse that we've highlighted here, we've seen a father will take his only son, whom he loves, okay, for God so loved the world, okay, to Moriah, Jerusalem, okay, and make an offering, sacrifice to be crucified. Why was Jesus crucified? He was crucified for you and for me. Let's keep going, okay? Now what do we see next? We see verse 3. What happens in verse 3? I'm going to put it on screen. It says that Abraham rose up early. Okay. Now, why is this significant? God tells someone, look, go and sacrifice your son. And he doesn't wait around. He doesn't say, God, you know what, let's not do this. Why? He rises up early and goes about his journey. Why does he do this? Okay. And even before we get to that, the key thing I want you to understand as well is, okay, at this point in verse 2, when God said to him, take your son Isaac, go to Mount Moriah and go to one of the mountains. Isaac was dead. Okay, in Abraham's heart, Isaac was dead. Okay, that's why he could rise up early and do it. And why was that? Okay, you need to go to the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 17 to 19. And you always have to let the Bible show you what the Bible is saying. What does it say in this piece of text? Okay, this piece of text tells you why he was so adamant, why he didn't mind going. Okay, at least for one reason. Because Hebrews says that Abraham believed all of the promises that God had given Abraham were contingent on this only son. And this text here highlights to us that Abraham believed that even if he was actually going to go through with this scenario, okay, God would raise his son up from the dead, okay, because God had made promises to Abraham that could no way, shape or form be fulfilled if Isaac was dead and was not raised from the dead, okay. Even that in itself, what happened to Jesus, okay, after he was crucified, what happened? He was raised from the dead, okay. So the more and more you think about all of this scenario, the more and more you put Jesus in the middle of all this, you can see it makes sense, okay? It was a father offering his only son, whom he loved, okay? John 3:16, going to Mount Moriah, Jerusalem, as an offering, sacrifice, being crucified. He rose up early because in his mind, he was dead. And the reason he was dead, because he knew ultimately, I'm going to give Isaac up. And worst case scenario, God will raise him up from the dead. Let's keep going. Verse 4. Okay, what does it say? On the third day. Okay, so verse 2, Isaac is basically dead to Abraham. 3 days later, what's going to happen? We're going to read what's going to happen when Jesus was crucified, raised from the dead. Can you see the pattern? Can you see the theme? What's actually going on here? Okay, let's go to verse 5 in chapter 22. Okay, what does Abraham say? I remember the first time after believing God, getting saved, reading this chapter and thinking to myself, why on earth did he say what he's going to say in verse 5? He's lying to his son, okay? And as I read through the Bible and came back to it and continued reading, I understood what was actually happening. What does he say? He doesn't lie, okay? He says, I and the lad will worship can come back. So what did Abraham know? He knew that one way or another, even if Isaac dies up in that mountain, he's coming back to life. They're going to worship and he's coming back. Okay? Jesus, the Father sacrificed the Son, and we know the Son was coming back. What's next? We go, and again, we've talked about this kind of model before in the Old Testament, showing something that's coming in the New Testament. There's even another thing that we're going to cover in this chapter, which is even more, it's probably the most significant out of anything we've even covered. If you think any of this stuff is deep already, there's one more thing later on that is even more powerful. But I mentioned there's another scenario like this in regards to child sacrifice. I'm going to put a card up here, okay, and you can watch this video because we've done a video about it as well. So make sure you watch that video after we get done here, okay? So 7 to 8, let's see what happens here, okay? What does God say to him? Or what does Abraham say? Okay, so Abraham says, everyone stay here. I'm going to go with my son. We're going to go and worship and we're going to come back. And it says that he gives Isaac the wood. He takes the fire in his hand. They start going. And Isaac says to his dad, he says, Father, okay, we've got the fire. We've got the wood. Where's the lamb? Okay. And what does Abraham say to Isaac? He says, God will provide himself. What does that mean? This isn't even the most significant we'll talk about in a minute. God will provide himself. What does that mean? Okay. As you read through this, as you understand Hebrews 11:17 to 9, as you understand Jesus in this whole event, you can start to see, okay, Jesus was God in the flesh. God will provide himself as an offering, okay, crucified, okay. Now, all of this stuff starts to make sense, okay. One more thing, okay, and I know we're skipping through the chapter. I definitely recommend you read it. And all I'm going to say that you do is keep Jesus in your mind. Okay. Verse 14. What happens? He basically goes through, he's about to basically kill Isaac. And the angel of the Lord from heaven says, Abraham, stop. Okay. I know that you really trust in me now. We get the reason why in the New Testament. So if you stop reading here, you'll never find out what's actually going on here, okay? But the angel of the Lord says to him, look, I know now that you won't withhold anything from me. And what does Abraham do? He names the place, the meaning of what he names the place, Jehovah Jireh, in the mount of the Lord, it shall be seen. What shall be seen? Okay, this should be bringing question marks. What's going to be seen in the mount of the Lord? Okay, Mount Moriah, Jerusalem. In a couple thousand years, in the mount of the Lord, okay, Calvary, Golgotha, okay, in that region, it will be seen when God will provide himself a lamb, an offering, okay, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. And this is why God told Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, not because he was bloodthirsty for children or anything like that, okay? I'll post scriptures up on screen now for you to see that, categorically show you that God isn't interested in child sacrifice. The reason God allowed this thing to play out, because this was a prophetic example, a prophecy thousands of years before Jesus was born, showcasing to you that a father would sacrifice his only son whom he loves, okay, in Jerusalem, offering. And 3 days later, God would raise him up from the dead, okay? The Lord would provide himself as an offering. In that mount it will be seen, okay? And in 3 days, 3 days later, God will raise him up from the dead. This is why God told Abraham to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice, to show what he was going to do thousands of years later, as the father who loves his son will make him a perfect offering for you and me, okay? So as we read this, you see for yourself just how wonderful, how powerful God's might and strength is. He's hidden these kind of things in scriptures thousands of years before they happen. And the naysayers will read this and quickly run away and say, God is interested in child sacrifice, when he really isn't. He was doing this to show you what was going to happen in the future, okay? And on top of it, he didn't allow Abraham to go through with it, okay? Just the ice on the cake, because he was going to go through with it thousands of years later. When you see this for what it is, what can you do with the Bible except look at it and say, wow, this is some wonderful piece of work, okay? Has to be written by a supreme being, not by man, but by the Spirit of God. So on that note, let me know what you think now, okay? Hopefully you commented early in the video when I asked for it. Comment again below the video now and let me know what you think based on what we've kind of just walked through in regards to why did God tell Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Hopefully this helps. Subscribe to the channel. Next time we produce videos like this and other Bible study videos as well, you can get them instant access. Thanks and take care, and I'll see you on the next video.